Hi, I'm Annalisa. I used to think family meant protection, safety, memory. But then my sister pushed my 6-year-old daughter into a pool. As a joke. She can't swim. And when I pulled her out, coughing, terrified, my mother laughed. My father shrugged. Let her learn, they said. What kind of family turns trauma into a lesson? What kind of family calls silent survival? And if they lied about this, what else had they buried under birthday cakes, photo albums, and polite Sunday dinners? You ever wonder how long someone can be erased before they decide to rewrite everything? I parked the car a few feet down the street from my parents' place and just sat there for a moment. Rowena hummed softly in the back seat, legs swinging as she clutched a gift bag tight to her chest. The Arizona sun had lost its bite that time of year, but something in the air still prickled at my skin. Familiar. Tight. The house ahead hadn't changed. Stucco walls, terracotta roof, the same flower pots Vera rearranged every holiday. Still perfect, still sterile. Ready? I asked, forcing a smile into my voice. Rowena nodded, oblivious to my unease. Do you think Aunt Zinnia will let me pet her dog again? I swallowed. We'll see, baby. Sometimes we walk into old rooms, hoping the light has changed, but all we find are the same shadows painted a different shade. The backyard was already buzzing when we stepped through the side gate. My mother, Vera, waved without looking up from the grill, and Zinnia, draped in effortless charm and linen, glided toward us like a magazine ad brought to life. Lisa, she sang, arms extended, but never quite committing to the hug. You're late, I checked my phone. It's 4:10. She shrugged, white teeth flashing. Same difference. Vera's voice floated over. Why don't you smile more like your sister? She knows how to host without looking like she's doing calculus. I glanced at Rowena, who was already exploring the yard, running her fingers along the flower bed. She didn't hear the jab. Or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. Either way, I was grateful for her quiet resilience. Rowena, sweetheart, Zinnia called out. Her tone dipped in honey. Want to see what Uncle Brett brought from Cabo? Rowena lit up and ran toward her. I stayed back, settling near the drink cooler, gripping a lemonade I didn't want. I watched my sister crouch beside my daughter, showing off trinkets, always the performer. Even the sunniest places cast long shadows. It happened fast. 1 second Rowena was smiling, gripping something sparkly, and the next, Zinnia nudged her back with a laugh. It looked light-hearted, like a joke. But Rowena stumbled. Her arms flailed. Her back foot missed the concrete edge of the pool, and then she was under. The splash silenced everything. Rowena! I dropped my drink. My body moved before thought. I kicked off my shoes mid-run and dove, the cold slicing through my skin. When I surfaced with her in my arms, she was coughing, sputtering, wide-eyed with terror. She can't swim, I barked, dragging her to the shallow end. Zinnia laughed. Relax, Lisa. It was just a joke. Just a joke? Rowena clung to me, her fingers gripping my shoulder like claws. My heart was pounding, not from the swim, but from the surge of fury bubbling beneath the surface. She could have drowned. Her head had hit the side. There was a red mark blooming above her left eyebrow. She's being dramatic, Vera said, barely glancing over. She didn't even go under that long. I turned to her, water dripping from my chin. She can't swim. Clarence appeared beside the grill, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Let her learn. That's how kids build resilience. No towel, no rush, no apology. Zinnia flipped her hair, already on her phone, laughing at something Brett was showing her. Rowena shook against me. I wrapped her in my arms, trying to shield her from the stares, the dismissal. I was soaked and she was trembling, but they acted like nothing had happened. It wasn't just water she almost swallowed. It was the last of my trust. We sat by the side of the pool for a while. I dried her off with the edge of my cardigan, teeth clenched so tightly I thought they'd crack. My daughter, 6 years old, nearly drowned because her aunt wanted a laugh, and the family called it growth. Later, when the sun dipped lower and the air turned cooler, I carried her inside to change. Zinnia was setting the table, cheerful and untouched. Vera was adjusting a centerpiece. Clarence, beer in hand, was talking to Brett about stocks. As I passed through the living room, no one stopped me. No one asked how Rowena was. I wasn't sure if they cared, or if they knew how to care. Rowena curled against me on the guest room bed, breathing steady now. But before her eyes closed, she looked at me and asked, "Did I do something wrong?" That question stayed in my chest, heavy and hot. What kind of family calls trauma a lesson? I didn't answer her, not yet. But I knew something had shifted. Maybe for the first time, I wasn't the only one who felt the crack. Maybe they weren't just careless. Maybe they were cruel. The air inside the house didn't match the sunlit glow pouring through the windows. It was warm, yes, pleasant to the skin, but underneath, there was a chill I couldn't name. Rowena was sitting beside me on the edge of the couch, bundled in one of my scarves, the only thing I had on hand after pulling her out of the water. Her hair was still damp, curls matted flat, and her hands clutched the fabric like it was armor. Dinner was being plated in the next room. Clinks of silverware, the low hum of casual conversation, and laughter rising from the dining table. I could smell roasted chicken and something sweet baking, peach cobbler maybe. Comforting scents in a house where comfort was a myth. No one had offered us a towel. Not when I carried my daughter inside soaked to the bone. Not when she sneezed. Not when her teeth chattered. When you scream and no one hears, it starts to feel like you never had a voice at all. I led Rowena down the hallway toward the guest bathroom. The tile was slick, and water from our clothes had trailed behind us like breadcrumbs. As I turned to go back and clean it up, Vera appeared with a smile too tight and a mop in hand. "Here," she said, pressing it against me. "Before someone slips. You understand." I stared at her, hoping for any flicker of softness. Nothing. I took the mop. Rowena was now wrapped in a small blanket I found in the linen closet. She was curled up in the corner of the couch, watching the flames in the fireplace flicker without really seeing them. I scrubbed the floor in silence, tile by tile. I wasn't cleaning a mess. I was erasing the evidence of their cruelty. Quiet, efficient, like they'd prefer. "She's not the first kid to fall in a pool," Vera said, walking past me like she was commenting on the weather. I didn't respond, but inside, something pulled tight. She's the only one whose family laughed. Clarence walked by next, chuckling to himself. He stopped by the fridge, grabbed another beer, and casually tossed out, "Next time she'll learn to float. That's survival, isn't it?" I paused, mop halfway to the bucket. Zinnia leaned in from the kitchen, sipping wine. Honestly, it might have been good for her. A little shock to the system never hurt anyone. She'll be fine. She said it like she was giving dietary advice, not talking about a child who could have drowned while everyone watched. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Rowena. It wasn't even just about the pool. It was a pattern, something older, something colder. I looked around that house, the table set like a magazine spread, the laughter that never included me, the way my mother fussed over Zinnia's napkin folds but hadn't asked once how her granddaughter was feeling. American culture loves resilience, but it forgets that real strength doesn't grow from being ignored. It grows from being believed. And none of them had ever believed me. Not when I said I was hurt, or tired, or overwhelmed. Not when I asked for help. Not when I succeeded. Not when I failed. They only believed in what made them comfortable. That night, after dinner, I couldn't eat, in conversation I wasn't part of. I sat on the edge of the guest bed while Rowena slept beside me. Her breathing had settled, but every so often she twitched, like her body was still unsure she was safe. I pulled out a notebook from my bag, the same one I used for groceries, parent-teacher notes, lesson plans. On a fresh page, I wrote the date. Then I listed what had happened. The time, the people present, the words said, the lack of towels, the mop, the cold looks, the laughter, the silence. They don't just dismiss pain, they groom it to stay quiet. This wasn't an isolated event. It was a structure. One I had walked back into, hoping it had crumbled, but it stood as solid as ever. They'd built it, and they expected me to maintain it. I wouldn't. I wouldn't scream. I would remember. As I turned off the lamp, slipping under the covers beside my daughter, she stirred. "Mommy," she whispered. "Yes, baby?" Did I make them mad? My breath caught, but I didn't let it break me. "No, sweetheart," I said softly, smoothing her hair. "You didn't do anything wrong." But I knew, and that's when I knew. This wasn't the first time they turned their backs. It was just the first time I saw it. The house was quiet when I got home. Too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort. It presses in around you like fog. I slipped off my shoes near the door and padded softly into the living room, careful not to wake Rowena. She was already asleep, curled up in her blanket on the couch, thumb resting near her lips, her breath steady but shallow. I poured myself a cup of tea I didn't really want and sat down at the kitchen table. The steam rose, but I didn't feel its warmth. My hands rested beside the mug, fingers twitching to do something, anything. Instead, I just sat, staring at the wood grain of the table. A knot in the surface reminded me of a scar, the kind you don't cover with polish because you've grown used to seeing it there. My mind replayed it all again. The push, the splash, her scream, the laughter. That look in Rowena's eyes that I hadn't seen before. Not just fear, but confusion. Like she couldn't figure out why no one else was as scared as she was. You don't lose your mind all at once. You give it away in pieces every time you say nothing. I reached for my notebook. The same spiral-bound one I used for grocery lists and school notes. But tonight, it held something else. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote the date, then sat in the stillness, waiting for the right words to surface. My pen hovered over the paper, and I thought back to earlier that night, before we left my parents' house. I hadn't even dried off fully when Clarence pulled me aside in the hallway, just past the guest bathroom. He had that look on his face, the one that said "man of the house" and "don't embarrass us" all at once. "It's not a big deal, Lizzie," he said, arms crossed. "Don't ruin the mood." I blinked at him. "She could have drowned." He scoffed. "You always make everything about drama. This is why people don't take you seriously. You escalate things that don't need it." That phrase, "you always," it stung more than it should have, because it wasn't new. It was a script I'd heard since I was 16, when I cried at my grandfather's funeral and was told I was making a scene. When I didn't make Cheer Squad and Vera told me, "You need thicker skin." When I didn't get into my dream college and Zinnia said, "You set your sights too high, that's on you." Every time I spoke up, they told me I was the thunderstorm at their picnic. But this time, it wasn't about me. It was about Rowena. And that made it different. The tears didn't come. I didn't need them to. What I needed was clarity, and I had it. I flipped the page again and started a new header in bold, the silence agreement. Below it, I began listing everything, word for word. Each phrase, each laugh, every time someone rolled their eyes, instead of asked if she was okay. Dates, times, witnesses. Not because I planned to go to war, but because I needed a record, because my memory deserved something more permanent than fog. Later, when I checked on Rowena again, I thought she was asleep, but as I pulled the blanket higher over her shoulder, her eyes fluttered open. "Mommy?" she whispered, voice barely there. "I'm here, baby." Her eyes searched mine. Was it my fault? And there it was, the fracture. "No," I said, brushing her hair back. "None of it was your fault. Ever." She nodded slowly, then turned her head into the pillow, drifting back off. I stayed there, sitting beside her, watching the way her tiny chest rose and fell. When I was a kid, I stopped crying because it never led to comfort, just scolding. So I learned to be quiet. I didn't want that for her. I wouldn't let that be her inheritance. They think silence is obedience. But I was done obeying. I returned to the kitchen, sat back down at the table, and opened my laptop. My hands moved on their own now, muscle memory from years of typing parent letters and lesson plans. But this wasn't about work. This was about truth. And if no one else would call it what it was, I would. That's what this would be. A record. A testimony. Not in court. At least not yet. But in my own life. For myself. For Rowena. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't break dishes or punch walls. I organized. I planned. If I wanted Rowena to believe she mattered, I had to show her someone was willing to fight for her. She wouldn't grow up confused about her value. Not in this house. Not with this mother. I closed the laptop, the screen fading into black as the hallway light spilled across the floor. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was deliberate. They're never going to silence me again. It was late afternoon when I pulled into the driveway again. The sun hung lower than I remembered, casting long strips of gold across the porch. Rowena shifted in the back seat, clutching the stuffed rabbit she never slept without. Her eyes scanned the house like she wasn't sure if we were visiting relatives or stepping into a courtroom. I couldn't blame her. Vera had called the night before, her voice syrupy, almost too sweet. "Just a family check-in," she said. "Let's clear the air. No judgment, I promise." I agreed, but only because I wanted to look them in the eye and make sure they knew I wasn't playing along anymore. Rowena and I weren't staying long, just long enough to hear what script they had rehearsed this time. Inside, everything was polished to perfection, fresh flowers on the table, a fruit platter that looked untouched. Even the lighting had that golden hour glow, like a photo staged for a realtor's website. Zinnia greeted us first, her tone warm, but her eyes distant. Look who decided to grace us with her presence. Then she leaned down, smoothing Rowena's hair like nothing had happened. "You're famous, you know," she said to her with a wink. Before I could ask what that meant, she pulled out her phone and pressed play. A video began. Slow-motion footage of Rowena falling backward into the pool. The caption? "Pool drama." With laughing emojis, edited with music, shared online, liked over 10,000 times. "You filmed that?" I asked, my voice low and flat. Zinnia chuckled, tapping through comments. "People love real-life moments. It's just content, Lizzie. Everyone shares everything these days." Vera appeared behind her, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. "Maybe this is your chance to lighten up, honey," she said, handing me one. "You always take things so personally." I didn't touch the glass. I couldn't move. The blood in my body felt like it had thickened, heavy and slow. They didn't just ignore the danger, I thought. They turned it into entertainment. Rowena had wandered into the living room by then, sitting quietly on the edge of the couch. Her legs didn't touch the floor. She was staring at the TV, but her eyes weren't tracking it. She knew. I followed Vera into the hallway, needing a moment away from the performance. "I want to see the new family album," she said casually, as if showing off baby pictures. We sat on the armchairs in the den while she flipped through pages. Smiling faces, perfect birthdays, beach vacations, 4th of July barbecues, and then photos from pool day. But something felt off. Rowena wasn't in any of them. I wasn't in them either. A wide shot of the backyard cropped just before us. Zinnia mid-laugh by the grill. Brett with his ridiculous apron, but no sign of the child who had been soaked and shaking. No trace of the woman who pulled her out. They had mastered the art of selective memory, I realized, of cutting away discomfort. I closed the book gently, looked Vera straight in the eye. "You're not erasing me," I said. "You're exposing yourselves." Her lips tightened, but she said nothing. Clarence, sitting in the kitchen nearby, stood and left the room without a word. Just disappeared into the garage like he always did when things got inconvenient. Zinnia passed by us moments later, phone still in hand, still scrolling. I walked over to Rowena and knelt in front of her. She looked at me the way she had in the hospital once, years ago, after a minor fall at the playground, waiting to see if I would tell her she was okay, even if she didn't feel it. This time I didn't lie. I pulled her close and held her in silence. They feared how I held up a mirror, I thought, not because I lied, but because I didn't. It wasn't rage I felt. It was clarity. Before we left, I stood by the door as Zinnia approached with her glass of rosé, all smiles and denial. "You've always been dramatic," she said. "That's the problem with you. Everything's an attack." I stepped closer, eyes locked on hers. "You may control the comments," I said, steady and sharp, "but not the consequences." Then I turned, my hand firm on Rowena's back as we stepped into the fading light. I didn't slam the door when I left, but I made sure they heard it close. We arrived at 6:01. Not late, not early, right on time. Rowena had spent 20 minutes picking out a headband that matched her dress, humming to herself as she smoothed her skirt in the car. I had told her it was just a birthday party, but my stomach had carried the weight of something heavier. Not nerves, not hope, something more like caution. From the moment we stepped into Zinnia's front entry, I knew we had been set up. The music was already playing. Guests were halfway through their meals, drinks half drained, plates smeared with the remains of what looked like catered salmon and herbed potatoes. Laughter floated through the house like perfume, manufactured, lingering too long. Vera spotted us from across the room and offered a smile so thin it barely touched her eyes. "Oh, I thought you knew. We moved dinner to 4, she said, as if I were the one with a faulty memory. I blinked. "No one told me." Vera touched my elbow lightly. "I told Zinnia to text you. Must have slipped her mind." Zinnia appeared beside her, glass of wine in hand, hair curled like she'd just stepped out of a salon chair. "I definitely sent it," she said, her voice syrupy. "Maybe it didn't go through." I checked my phone in front of them. No missed messages, nothing filtered to spam, no missed calls, no texts, just silence. Mistakes don't repeat themselves. That's planning. Rowena tugged my sleeve. "Mommy, there's no food left." Zinnia clapped her hands together. "Well, there's cake coming soon. That's what really matters, right?" Her gaze flicked down toward Rowena's shoes, scuffed from the playground. "So cute." I scanned the room. Not a single empty chair at the long dining table. Everyone had a place. Crystal glasses clinked, napkins folded like origami swans. Beside the window sat a smaller coffee table with 2 mismatched stools, low to the floor, tucked away like an afterthought. Zinnia followed my eyes. "You can sit over there, like last time." Like last time. I looked around the room. No one stood. No one offered a chair. No one made space. Rowena blinked at me, unsure whether she should pretend not to notice. I walked to the hallway, opened the linen closet, and pulled out a folded chair. It creaked as I carried it across the room and set it down at the main table. I placed my hand gently on Rowena's shoulder and guided her to sit beside me. Every fork paused. The sound of chewing slowed. "We won't be background extras in your family photo," I said calmly, placing my napkin on my lap. Vera let out a low breath. "This is not the time." "It never is," I replied, "because you never want the truth in the frame." Clarence looked down at his plate. Brett cleared his throat and stood to check the thermostat, though the room was not cold. A couple of cousins glanced away, suddenly interested in the centerpiece. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Sometimes silence does the cutting for you. As dessert was served, Zinnia made a show of laughing loudly at a joke no one told. Her followers were filming. She wanted footage, not connection. She needed noise, not acknowledgement. I sat through the cake. I sipped water. I smiled at Rowena when she looked up, and when Zinnia's daughter opened presents, we clapped politely. But I made note of every face that wouldn't meet mine, every shoulder that turned just slightly away. I took out my phone and opened the Notes app. I titled the entry, "The Night They Pretended We Weren't There." I recorded the time we arrived, who had food, who didn't. I didn't type like I was angry. I typed like I was filing. Rowena leaned into me midway through cake. "Can we go now?" "Yes, honey," I whispered. "We've seen what we came to see." Before we reached the door, Zinnia called out behind me. "Hey, don't be dramatic. It's just a chair." I turned slowly. "Next time," I said, my voice clear but low, "don't forget a seat. You might need one when you're the one left standing." And I walked out with my daughter's hand in mine, the only warmth in the entire house. I didn't just walk away that night. I walked out with something they never expected. Leverage. Vera's message came in the middle of a Tuesday morning while I was preparing a lesson plan and Rowena was coloring on the floor beside me. "Just the girls," she wrote. "Casual tea this Saturday. Would love to see you both." There were no apologies, no references to the last gathering, no acknowledgement of chairs or cold dinners or cameras. Just tea. Casual. I stared at the message for a long time before I responded with a single word. "Sure." Saturday afternoon, Rowena and I stood on Vera's front porch again, her arms wrapped tightly around a drawing she had worked on all week. Construction paper folded into a card with glitter hearts and stick figures. "To Grandma," it said. "I love you." She beamed up at me. "You think she'll like it?" I kissed her forehead. "She should." Inside, everything smelled like cinnamon and oranges. Vera had candles lit, classical music playing at a volume just loud enough to make conversation feel formal. Zinnia and two cousins I hadn't seen in months were already seated on the couch, sipping from matching mugs and laughing like sorority sisters on a reunion weekend. "Oh, there you are," Zinnia said, gesturing vaguely at the dining table. "We saved you spots by the window." Rowena walked straight to Vera and held out the drawing with both hands. "For you," she said, a little shy, a little proud. Vera took it with a wide smile and a quiet, "How sweet." She set it aside on the edge of the buffet table behind her, just barely out of sight. I watched her fingers tap twice on top of it, like sealing away something temporary. We sat, and tea was poured. There was a tray of scones, another of cucumber sandwiches, all lined up like the afternoon was a lifestyle blog shoot. I sipped quietly, speaking when spoken to, and answered questions about work, Rowena's school, and how I was holding up. After half an hour, Rowena got bored and asked if she could look around the backyard. I nodded. A few minutes later, I excused myself to check on her. I walked through the kitchen and stopped. The trash can was open. Inside, crumpled among used napkins and tea-stained paper towels, was Rowena's card. Torn at the fold, a smear of glitter stuck to the side of an empty yogurt container. My fingers went cold. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just stood there, letting the silence of it all settle around me like smoke. They didn't just throw away her art. They threw away who she made it for. I didn't bring it up. Not then. Not there. Not when Rowena was smiling in the backyard, chasing shadows with her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. I walked back into the living room, sat down, and folded my napkin across my lap again. Later, as we prepared to leave, Zinnia called Rowena over. "Wait! Don't go yet! Grandma has a gift for you." She handed Rowena a plush unicorn toy with a satin ribbon around its neck. "She saw this and just had to get it," Zinnia cooed. "She wanted you to know she's always thinking of you." Rowena hugged it close and looked at me with the widest eyes. I took the toy gently from her, turned it over, and found the sticker I had peeled and stuck on the bottom days ago when I bought it myself. I reached into the seam and pulled out a folded note. It read, "For when you feel lonely, Mommy loves you always." My handwriting, my gift. They had taken it from my bag, rewrapped it, and claimed it. That's what they do. Love jacket. Rewrite it. Sell it back. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I crouched down beside Rowena, handed her back the unicorn, and whispered, The people who love you don't need to lie about it. Zinnia tilted her head. Something wrong? I smiled. No, just tired. We stood. Rowena waved goodbye. Vera smiled with her usual closed-lip deficiency. The cousins kept sipping. As we stepped onto the porch, I heard someone inside murmur, "She's so sensitive." I turned halfway, offered a small nod toward the doorway, and said aloud, "Sensitive people sense what others try to hide." No one followed us out. Back in the car, Rowena was already humming again. She held the unicorn in her lap, twisting the ribbon between her fingers. As we pulled away from the curb, I unlocked my phone and opened the message thread with my attorney. I typed, "Let's move forward, quietly but fast." They thought I was the problem. I was just the proof they couldn't erase. The message from Vera was simple. "Can you stop by this weekend? I'm sorting through some of Mom's keepsakes. Thought you might want to help." I stared at it longer than I should have, the words sitting heavy in my chest. There was no apology, no mention of last week, no explanation, just another invitation to pretend. Still, a part of me needed to go. Not for her, but for me, for Irene. Saturday came with its usual heat, and Rowena wore her favorite book and curled up in the den with juice and headphones while I climbed the stairs with Vera. She moved slower than usual, pointing out boxes, commenting on dust, acting like it was some sentimental stroll down memory lane. The attic was dim, the small windows letting in stripes of late afternoon light. Everything smelled like old wood and forgotten stories. We opened boxes together, quietly. Photo albums, crocheted Afghans, recipe cards. Then I saw it. An old velvet jewelry box tucked in the corner of a cedar chest. I reached for it before she could offer. The blue opal necklace was inside. Except it wasn't. Zinnia walked in at that exact moment, laughing at something on her phone, already halfway through the doorway when she looked up and froze. She was wearing it. The opal pendant shimmered against her white blouse. Irene's necklace, the one she had promised me when I was 10. "Grandma said it matched my eyes," Zinnia said with a smirk, her voice casual, rehearsed. "She wanted me to have something timeless." My chest tightened. "That necklace was mine," I said, voice steady. "She gave it to me before she passed. She made me promise not to give it away." Vera, who had suddenly grown very interested in folding tissue paper, finally spoke. "Annalisa, you were always too sentimental. She wanted it worn, not stored in a drawer." "No," I replied, meeting her eyes. "She wanted it remembered." Zinnia chuckled. "You really think Grandma would leave something that elegant to someone who teaches public school?" I didn't rise to it, didn't need to. I looked straight at her, at that pendant resting over a chest full of entitlement. They didn't forget, I thought. They reassigned love like a promotion. The moment passed, brittle and sharp, but I didn't let it linger. I turned back to the boxes. That's when I noticed a stack of file folders beside the chest, half tucked under a loose quilt. I lifted one and felt the familiar pull of manila. I flipped it open. Deed transfer forms, property titles, my name. But something was wrong. My signature, slightly off. Slanted differently, a curl missing at the end. I'd signed a lot of documents in my life, but never that one. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo. They always called me dramatic, but fraud isn't a feeling, it's a felony. Clarence stepped into the attic, sensing the change in air. "Everything okay?" I held the folder tighter. "Was there a reason you didn't tell me about this transfer?" He paused. "We needed to simplify things. Too many hands in the pot. You wouldn't understand legal stuff." "I understand theft masked in calligraphy." Zinnia leaned against a beam, arms crossed. "You're reading too much into it." Vera sighed loudly, like the victim in a soap opera scene. "Why does everything have to be a confrontation?" I didn't answer. I didn't throw the folder. I didn't scream. I placed the papers back into the folder, slid it into my bag, and walked past them without another word. Back downstairs, I kissed Rowena's head and told her we were leaving. Zinnia texted me later that night. "Let's not make this bigger than it is." I stared at the screen, then typed one sentence back. "It's already big. You just didn't expect me to grow into it." They didn't just cross a line. They redrew the map and forgot I knew the original. The invitation came midweek, written like an olive branch, but laced with pressure. "Family dinner," Vera said over the phone. "Let's all talk face to face. Clear the air." She paused, then added, "We miss Rowena." What she meant was, they wanted control back. I didn't argue, I accepted. I even offered to bring dessert, because when someone hands you a loaded script, sometimes the smartest thing to do is show up and flip the ending. Saturday evening, Clarence and Vera's house was dressed for presentation. Candles flickered on every surface. The dining table gleamed. Zinnia floated around in a cream jumpsuit like she owned the air between the walls. The smell of lemon roast and something too buttery drifted through the hall. Rowena sat quietly next to me on the edge of the couch, thumbing through a book she brought from home. I'd promised her it wouldn't be long. She nodded without asking questions. She was learning how to read rooms at an age I'd hoped she wouldn't have to. Zinnia made small talk as if it were a performance, updates on her new contract, another brand partnership. My cousins listened. Brett cracked jokes. Clarence lingered near the bar cart, avoiding direct eye contact. I sat in silence, letting the performance spin itself into its final act. Then, when the room reached that quiet lull right before dessert, I stood. "I brought something," I said calmly, reaching into my bag. All eyes shifted. A few cousins straightened in their chairs. Brett looked suddenly very interested in the ceiling. I placed 2 stacks of printed documents onto the table. My voice was steady. "These are copies of the deed transfer forms and financial records tied to Grandma Irene's property. One of them has my signature, but I never signed it." Clarence's face flushed instantly. His hand tightened on his glass. "I'm formally requesting a legal review, not for drama, for clarity." Vera took a slow sip of her wine. Zinnia's smile faltered, twitching at the edges. "You expected me to stay quiet," I said, locking eyes with them both. "You forget. Quiet doesn't mean blind." Clarence set his glass down harder than necessary. "Are you threatening us?" "No," I replied, folding the extra copies back into my bag. "I'm correcting you." The silence was loud. Zinnia cleared her throat and tried to pivot. "Can we not do this now? It's a birthday, not a deposition." "I agree," I said, reaching again into my bag. "So I'll keep this short." I pulled out a small flash drive and passed it to my cousin Melanie, who worked in local journalism and hadn't said a word all night. "There's a video on there. Some of you may have seen it already, shared by Zinnia. A slow-mo reel titled Pool Drama." Gasps. "It's paired with hospital records," I continued. "Rowena was evaluated after that incident. She had mild trauma symptoms and a bruised rib. But hey, it was just content, right?" I held up my phone and played 15 seconds of it aloud. Zinnia's voice laughing over Rowena's small body flailing in the water. Brett in the background chuckling. Vera's voice faint but clear. "She'll be fine. Let her learn?" The laughter around the table died instantly. Melanie shifted in her seat. One uncle muttered something under his breath. Vera stood abruptly. "This isn't fair, Annalisa." "No. What wasn't fair was being told to stay quiet when I begged for help. You raised your voice when I needed support. Now hear mine without interruption." Zinnia stood next. "You've always played the victim, always needed a stage." "No," I said. "You needed an audience. I just needed a boundary." The room fell into a hush that felt more like a crack in glass than anything peaceful. No one rushed to defend them. Clarence stared at the wall. Vera sat down slowly. Zinnia stormed out without another word. I collected my things, turned to the rest of the family, and said, "This is just the opening argument." Then I walked out with Rowena by my side, her hand in mine, steady and strong. The court of public opinion had just opened, and I wasn't the one on trial anymore. 2 days after the dinner confrontation, Vera texted me again. "Come get the rest of your things. Just take what's yours and go." No greeting, no signature, just cold precision. After all, sentimentality was never part of her vocabulary, unless she was performing for an audience. I didn't tell anyone I was going, not even Rowena, who sat buckled in the back seat, humming to herself and flipping through a paperback. I told her we were just making a quick stop before the park. The house was quieter than usual when I arrived. No sounds of the television, no clatter from the kitchen, just the distant hum of the AC struggling against the midday sun. Vera wasn't waiting at the door. I let myself in. Upstairs, the attic door groaned as I pulled it down, the ladder creaking under my weight. Dust floated in the shaft of sunlight, slicing through the single attic window. I hadn't been up there in years. The insulation still sagged in the corners, and the smell of cardboard, mildew, and old pine hit me like an old perfume I once hated. I found the boxes quickly, labeled in Vera's precise handwriting, Annelies Misk. I was halfway through the second one, tucking away high school notebooks and a faded sweater, when I saw the frame. It was tucked behind a stack of old board games and a broken lamp. A silver-edged photo frame, the glass a little cracked in the corner. Inside it was a picture I hadn't seen in decades. Me and Irene. I remembered the day, still wearing the opal necklace she gave me, cheeks red from running outside, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. It was the kind of photo that made you pause, the kind that made memory feel physical. But something was wrong. My face had been cut out, not blurred, not faded, cut. A sharp, clean slice, like someone had used a blade. The silence in that attic changed temperature. It went from dusty and warm to something sharp and metallic. I could still hear Irene's voice from that day. One day, when they try to rewrite history, show them this. I placed the frame in my bag. Not for revenge, not for proof, but because some truths deserve to be preserved, even if they're missing pieces. I climbed down slowly, trying not to let my hand shake as I steadied the ladder. Back downstairs, I passed through the kitchen. Vera was there, wiping the counter like it had offended her. She didn't look up. "I got everything," I said simply. She nodded without speaking. I left the key on the entry table, no note. Just the key. The way they had always left their answers. Short, final, unexplained. As I stepped outside, the sun hit me full in the face. I blinked and spotted Mrs. Delaney from next door, watering her roses. She looked up, waved, and called out across the yard. "Hey, Annalisa, everything okay?" I crossed to the sidewalk. "Just finishing up," I said. She leaned on her cane and gave me a curious look. "You know, your mom said you had a breakdown, a while ago. I always thought that was strange. You were the one always holding things together, far as I could tell." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "I wasn't broken," I said. "Just tired of pretending." She patted my hand and nodded. "That house has a lot of voices, not all of them kind." As I walked back to the car, I realized something. The lies they told didn't stay inside those walls. They echoed down the block, filtered through neighbor gossip and twisted explanations. But truth had a way of traveling too. Quiet, steady, real. Rowena looked up as I climbed in. "Are we really done here now?" I buckled in, glanced at the house one last time, and said, "Almost." Back home, after tucking Rowena in for a nap, I sat at the kitchen table. My laptop was already open. I pulled up the draft I'd saved weeks ago. "To my lawyer, final step." Then I started typing. Closure isn't quiet. Sometimes it clicks, like a lock, finally turning. Rowena's cough started again around 4 in the morning. Deep, rattling, stubborn. I sat up in bed before she even called out for me. It had been 3 nights in a row, and while I told myself it was just a cold, something in my gut said otherwise. By 9:30, we were sitting in a sterile exam room at Dr. Brennan's pediatric clinic. She'd been Rowena's doctor since she was 3. Kind, quick to smile, but serious when it mattered. Today, he didn't smile. He tapped lightly on the stethoscope and pressed it against Rowena's back. She shivered, and I reached out to squeeze her hand. "There's a mild inflammation in her lower airway," he said finally, "likely from chemical exposure. Something like unbalanced chlorine. Did she spend time in a pool recently?" I nodded. "A week ago, my family's house." He scribbled something down. "It's not severe right now, but left unchecked, it can cause persistent respiratory irritation, even asthma, especially at her age." My fingers curled tightly around the edge of the exam table. My voice didn't shake, but something inside me cracked open. I held it together through the prescriptions, the discharge instructions, the polite smile to the front desk nurse, but by the time we got back to the car, I was already texting my attorney. Attached, the pediatric notes, the prescriptions, a time-stamped photo of Rowena's treatment. They said it was just water, but the water carried what they refused to see: danger and their denial. Later that afternoon, while Rowena napped with her nebulizer humming gently beside her, I sat on the couch staring out the window, sipping tea I couldn't taste. My mind kept circling back to Clarence's voice. "Let her learn." The words hit differently now, deeper, sharper. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was Rowena's mother first, and I was done negotiating with people who mistook cruelty for culture. The phone rang just before dinner. Unknown number. I answered anyway. "Annalisa?" a woman's voice said. "This is Odile. I used to clean for your parents." I blinked. "Yes, hi, I remember." "I heard some things," she said gently. "Someone mentioned there's been legal talk." "There has," I said, guarded. She hesitated. "I don't know if this helps, but years ago, maybe 10, maybe more, your father had me shred some paperwork, something about the house. I remember because the signature looked copied, not traced, just off." My breath stilled. "You remember the name on it?" "It was yours," she said. "But I knew you weren't involved. You weren't even around then." "I see." "I'm willing to speak if needed," she added. "I always thought something was off, but it wasn't my place to say." "Thank you, Odile. That means more than you know." I hung up, staring at the ceiling, letting her words settle like dust on an old shelf. Truth sometimes arrives late, but it never comes empty-handed. After I tucked Rowena in that night and checked her breathing for the 3rd time, I sat down at my desk. The house was quiet, only the occasional creak from the heater. I opened a blank document and began typing my final affidavit. I outlined every event, every word, every silence that was used like a weapon. They buried everything under silence. I was digging it up, one signed lie at a time. When I finished, I leaned back, stared at the blinking cursor, and saved the file. Then I opened my calendar. Mediation, confirmed. Next stop, court, and I'm not going for revenge. I'm going for restoration. They thought silence was safety, but I was the storm they never braced for. I expected the aftermath to be noisy. Retaliation, denial, maybe even another forced family gathering under the guise of resolution. But instead, I was met with silence. No phone calls, no emails, not even Zinnia's usual passive-aggressive posts on social media. The quiet was so absolute, it didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like surrender. And strangely, it was louder than shouting. Sometimes silence is louder than denial. Sometimes it's agreement. For the first time in a long while, my home didn't feel like a waiting room. It felt like mine, not a holding pen between battles. The stillness wasn't ominous anymore. It was healing. Rowena was sprawled across the living room rug, building towers out of magnetic tiles. She didn't ask about Vera. She didn't mention Zinnia. She giggled to herself, humming along to a tune only she could hear. I walked to the bookshelf, looking for a storybook she liked. As I pulled it free, something slid out and landed at my feet. An envelope. Worn edges. Yellowed slightly with time. My name was on it. In Irene's handwriting. My heart paused. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd written my first affidavit, and opened the letter. Her words poured out, soft but deliberate, as if she'd been watching, waiting, knowing I would find this when I was ready. If they ever try to strip you of truth, remember you were the one who never needed their permission. Irene had always had a way of saying more with less. She'd taught me how to press wildflowers between books, how to listen for things unsaid, how to make silence into strength. Your truth is never too much, she wrote. It's exactly enough for the right people. I pressed the letter against my chest. I didn't cry. I just breathed deeper than I had in months. Later, I walked the apartment slowly. Everything felt lighter. Even the shadows on the wall seemed less sharp. The plant in the corner I thought I'd killed had started to sprout new green. A metaphor I didn't need to stretch. I opened a memory box tucked in my closet. Not to mourn, but to reclaim. I found old birthday cards Rowena had made me, a photograph of her as a baby on Irene's lap, and the necklace that had once been stolen from me and later returned without apology. I didn't need to burn the past. I just had to stop carrying it. An email came in while I was brushing Rowena's hair. My lawyer's name blinked across the screen. Your claims have been validated. Mediation scheduled. We're moving forward. I didn't feel glee, just confirmation. A quiet knowing that accountability, not revenge, had always been the point. Rowena looked up at me, eyes wide. Will we have to see them again? Maybe, I said, but not on their terms. That night, after tucking her in, I pinned Irene's letter inside the door of my closet. Not hidden, not folded away. I wanted it to be the first thing I saw each morning. They didn't break me. They built the woman who walked away. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. But justice has a way of echoing louder than anger. The front door groaned open, but no one greeted me. No scent of roast chicken. No muffled hum of the television with the volume too loud. Just light, soft, steady sunlight pouring through the windows, touching floors that no longer remembered footsteps. The house was empty. For the first time, completely. 2 weeks earlier, the court ruling made it official. The property, once cloaked in generations of denial and favoritism, now bore my name. Vera, Clarence, Zinnia, gone without ceremony. They didn't even fight it in the end. Not publicly. Not in front of a judge. That was the final confirmation that they knew. They never thought I'd have the keys. They forgot I built the locks. I walked through slowly. The air felt lighter now, as if the walls had exhaled. I passed the fireplace where Zinnia once posed for photos. The hallway Vera used to rush down in heels too sharp for empathy. The kitchen where Clarence once scoffed, "You wouldn't understand legal things." I understood more than they ever gave me credit for. But I wasn't here to gloat. I wasn't here to reclaim a memory. I was here to rewrite a legacy. That Monday, I'd signed the papers with a nonprofit that specialized in trauma recovery for single mothers. We were converting the house, floor by floor, corner by corner. By the time summer came, this place would open as a safe haven. Not a museum of wounds, but a home for healing. I stood beneath the old chandelier for the last time, then nodded to the contractor. Take it down, replace it with something softer. He nodded, respectful. No questions asked. The walls were being painted, new floors installed. I'd walked the blueprints with the lead architect, circled where therapy rooms would go, where a small reading corner would sit beneath the bay window. The pantry would become a space for donated supplies. The master bedroom? Converted into a nursery for mothers with newborns. Outside, the new plaque was already installed beside the gate. Leona House, for the ones they tried to silence. I pressed my hand gently against the letters. Solid, permanent. Revenge didn't taste like victory. This did. The story made the rounds online faster than I expected. A local paper picked it up. Then a national nonprofit featured it on their blog. The article never named them. Vera, Clarence, Zinnia. But those who needed to know, knew. Vera's friends stopped calling. Zinnia's follower count dropped by the thousands. Clarence refused interviews. And I? I didn't say a word. No press. No interviews. No tell-all. I let the actions speak. Justice cannot be for one side alone, but must be for both. Eleanor Roosevelt had said that. And she was right. This wasn't just about exposing them. It was about choosing what came after. That evening, Rowena brought me a drawing. Our house, but filled with flowers and wide-open windows. The stick figures weren't labeled, but I could tell which one was me. Tall, arms wide, standing next to her, the smaller one with a sun in her hand. "Is it ours now?" she asked. "It's ours to give," I said. "And that makes it better." As the sun dipped lower, I walked the house one last time before locking up for the evening. Every room had echoes, but now they were mine to fill with something new. When I reached the door, I slid the key into the brand new lock, one that didn't match the ones Vera had cut long ago. Outside, Vera stood at the end of the sidewalk. I didn't flinch. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her blouse was pressed, her hair pinned like always, but her eyes had lost their script. For once, she had no line to deliver. She opened her mouth to speak. I held her gaze and said, "You made me silent. I made that strength." Then I locked the door behind me and walked to the car where Rowena was waiting. They thought they'd written my ending, but I took the pen and rewrote the future.